Hello, everyone. Thank you for waiting so patiently. Welcome and thank you for joining Brown War Watch tonight to discuss prospects for Middle Eastern policy during the Biden administration. For those who are unfamiliar with our group, Brown War Watch, we're a student anti-war and peace activist group on the Brown University campus, and we've been working for peace since 2017. For those who are eager to hear more about our work, you can reach out directly to us at our email brownwarwatch@brown.edu, as well as on Twitter, Facebook, and our website, brownwarwatch.com. We meet weekly throughout the semester, and we welcome all political persuasions and religious beliefs united to build a more peaceful world, dismantle the profligate war machine, and raise awareness about conflicts around the world, and now the rising tensions between the world's superpowers. We're particularly focused on the intersection of militarism and other injustices, whether they be racial, economic, or environmental, among others. And we are super honored tonight to have Hassan El-Tayyab join us this evening. Hassan is the lead lobbyist on Middle Eastern policy for the Friends Committee on National Legislation, FCNL. It's a national nonpartisan Quaker organization that lobbies Congress and the administration to advance peace, justice, as well as environmental stewardship. Prior to joining FCNL in August of 2019, Hassan was the co-director of the national advocacy group, Just Foreign Policy. And there he led their lobbying work to advance a more progressive foreign policy in the Middle East and Latin America. He also played a major role in the successful passage of the War Powers Resolution to end US military aid to the Saudi-UAE coalition's war in Yemen. Hassan's passion for foreign affairs is rooted in his desire to make life better for people in the Middle East, including his family that lives in Jordan. He's convinced that advancing a more peaceful and diplomacy-based foreign policy in the Middle East is crucial, not only for the family he loves, but for peace and stability worldwide. You can view his writings and commentaries, which have been featured in numerous news outlets, which include BBC World News, The Hill, Al Jazeera, Huffington Post, The Intercept, and more. He holds a BA in political science from the University of Rhode Island, and you can stay up to date on his analyses by following him on Twitter at Hassan El-Tayyab. Also, if you're interested in joining the Rhode Island chapter, the Rhode Island FCNL chapter, please head to the brownwarwatch.com calendar of events to learn more about our weekly Friday meetings. If you'd like to join, we meet on Fridays at 4. And the link to join is posted on the calendar. You can also access various lobbying and advocacy tools via the FCNL website. Okay, so now I'd like to shift focus to tonight's event. I want to start by acknowledging that the Middle East is an enormous geographic region, but in the interest of time, tonight we're going to be focusing in on two flashpoints, Yemen and Iran. Currently, Yemen is experiencing the largest ongoing humanitarian crisis with more than 24 million people, about 80% of the population in need of humanitarian assistance, and that includes more than 12 million children. On the other hand, continued escalation of tensions with Iran, as demonstrated by withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal, maximum pressure sanctions, the assassination of General Soleimani, have all dramatically increased the prospect of war. It is likely that these two issues will be on the forefront of the Biden foreign policy agenda and an important topic to keep this community informed about. Tonight, Hassan will be discussing the history of these conflicts, how they're connected, what policies we can help support, and how those of us living in Rhode Island are uniquely positioned to affect change. Hassan's going to be speaking for the next 25 to 30 minutes, and we will follow up with a Q&A with a hard stop at around 8 o'clock. So to that end, please submit your questions through the chat function. We look forward to addressing them soon. Thank you so much, Hassan, for being here tonight. Again, those who are interested in learning more, follow him on Twitter. Those who haven't attended our weekly meetings, you're welcome to. We hope to see you soon. And now I'll pass it over to Hassan, who we're so thankful for.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Noor, and been a big time fan of Brown War Watch for quite a while. I don't know if you heard in my bio, I went to school at URI, so I spent a lot of time in Rhode Island, so I know the state pretty well. And I grew up in Massachusetts, just, I think maybe about 45 minutes to an hour north. So anyway, a lot of love for Rhode Island. So yeah, we have a lot to discuss tonight. There is so much going on. We are looking at a transition. Obviously, Trump's last day is today, I think, his last full day in office, and tomorrow, President-elect Biden, soon to be President Biden, is going to take over. Now, that has a lot of implications for the Middle East and Iran and Yemen in particular. The makeup of the Congress has a lot of implications for the Middle East as well, now that we have a Democratic-controlled Senate, Democratic-controlled House, and a Democrat in the White House. So what does that all mean? I wonder how far back I should take folks on Yemen. Do you think I need to explain the origins of the war, or can I just go right into it?
Um, I think that what do you mean by go right into it? Just,
Well, go into like where we're at today. I just don't, I just wanted to
I
make
think
sure
that's
that.
fine in the interest of time.
Okay, great. It's a complex history. It started in 2000. I mean, Yemen's had a complex history well before this, but in 2011, the Arab Spring happened. There was a nonviolent revolution that removed Saleh from power. Hadi, the then vice president, became the interim leader. Years later, because of all sorts of indigenous reasons to Yemen, the Houthis rose up. They ousted Hadi from power, and Hadi fled to Saudi Arabia and Riyadh to get support from the Saudi-led coalition. The coalition was formed with the backing of the United States, with the backing of other Western allies, and absolute pummeling of Yemen began. Starting in 2015, the conflict has pushed 16 million people are living on the brink of famine. 80% are food insecure. Millions of cases of cholera. COVID has been devastating for the country. It's all made worse by Saudi Arabia and the UAE's assault on agricultural infrastructure, weddings, hospitals, markets, and also the blockade on all ports of entry into the country, the air, land, and sea blockade. So it's just been heartbreaking, and the situation continues to be complex. Now, what is the U.S. doing, and what are we trying to get Biden to do? Since the start of the war, the Obama administration back in 2015 authorized the use of the U.S. military to help support the coalition. We provided mid-air refueling, which we've since ended, according to the Pentagon, logistical support, spare parts transfers, and intel sharing and targeting assistance to coalition airstrikes. On top of just the military complicity, we've also provided weapon sales, but even beyond all the military hardware, there is a certain, level of just support that we're providing that perpetuates the violence on just purely diplomatic grounds, where the coalition is saying, well, we have the world's greatest democracy backing us up, and it's making diplomacy really difficult. So our whole strategy has been to let's end support for the coalition and then use that pressure to get them to reach a ceasefire deal in Yemen that includes all parties to the conflict, the Houthis, the Southern Transitional Council, but really importantly, civil society and especially women and girls, and bring everybody to the table. But as long as we're supporting militarily this coalition airstrike and this campaign on Yemen, it's going to be very difficult. Over the Trump era, we've passed several Yemen war powers resolutions to cut off support for that war. We've passed resolutions, through the House and Senate to cut off weapon sales to both Saudi and the UAE. Unfortunately, Trump was in there and he kept vetoing the bills that we put to his desk. He vetoed the war powers resolution, the resolutions of disapproval on the weapon sales. They stripped out provisions from the National Defense Authorization Act in 2020, FY 2020 and FY 2021, unfortunately. So we're at this position where Biden has said a lot of really important things and a lot of good things on what to do on Yemen. He said he wants to end support for the war. I don't know if folks were nerding out on C-SPAN today, but I definitely was watching all the hearings that were happening. Watching Blinken, watching Lloyd Austin at Defense Secretary, And by and large, what I heard from Blinken sounded pretty good. They want to end U.S. military support for the Saudi-led coalition war in Yemen. The problem is we don't really know exactly what that all looks like. Some of this is a little bit up in the air, up into interpretation. So we have some work in the advocacy world to kind of advance that. So I want to talk about some of those things that we can do. One, I think we're going to see another Yemen War Powers resolution. And just a little bit of background, a War Powers resolution is basically a bill that allows Congress to vote to end an unauthorized war. And if Ro Khanna wants to introduce this probably shortly after the inauguration and force Congress to take a vote on cutting off that support. And that's pretty significant because one, it would be the first time a president ever signed a war powers resolutions, and it's going to help us end other wars. Use this vehicle, strengthen this vehicle to end other unauthorized wars, and it's also going to show the people of Yemen and the world community that Biden and Congress are united in wanting to end the war. And I think that's going to be significant for diplomacy. And UN Special Envoy to Yemen, Martin Griffiths, it'll help his work in showing that we have a united front. So that's really important, kind of getting that through. I think Senator Reid is going to be especially important on this question, whether or not we can get it over the finish line, because we run the risk of some folks saying, well, Biden has already said he's going to end the war. Why do we need to engage Congress? I think as folks that want peace, we have to strengthen this tool to end endless wars. The second thing I'll mention on this military support side, I want to go into the humanitarian stuff in a second too. I think it's important that we cut off the weapon sales to both Saudi Arabia and the UAE. One, there was a vote in December where there were two joint resolutions of disapproval to cut off $23 billion of weapon sales to the UAE. It passed virtually, I should say it didn't pass, but we got almost every Democrat to join the effort to block the weapons to the UAE, the Reaper drones and the F-35s and these munitions. Everybody, including Senator Reid and Senator Whitehouse, voted except for two Democratic senators in Sinema and Kelly from Arizona, and every other Republican besides Rand Paul voted to green light the UAE weapons. So that's really important. I haven't heard what Biden plans to do on the UAE. He's been pretty good at talking about Saudi, talking about Khashoggi, talking about the Saudi war in Yemen. But that's one area that I think in the grassroots community, we need to make sure that the UAE is held accountable and we're not selling weapons to the UAE anymore. I think we need a complete arms embargo. They've committed a lot of war crimes in Yemen. They're perpetuating the violence. Even though they drew down militarily, they still operate with 90,000 proxies in the region. They're transferring weapons to Al-Qaeda affiliates. And it's deeply problematic. They are supporting the Southern Transitional Council. They're working on annexing Socotra and other parts of Yemen. So we definitely have to hold them accountable. And unfortunately, because of the Abraham Accords, everything in the Middle East is connected. So you have to sort of go into it. The Abraham Accords is really, that and the fact that the UAE drew down militarily. They pulled out a lot of their forces from Yemen. Has really helped their image in D.C. And people are saying, well, we really support normalization with Israel, so we're gonna not pay attention to the war crimes in Yemen. We can't let that happen. Now, the second thing is the weapons to Saudi. Now, Trump has sold a lot of weapons to Saudi Arabia, but in the lame duck, he's greenlighted not just the UAE sales, but about $800 million in new weapons to Saudi Arabia. Luckily, the new House Foreign Affairs Committee chairman, Congressman Meeks from New York, he introduced two joint resolutions of disapproval to block those sales. And as much as we can do to really build momentum and build support for those JRDs or joint resolutions of disapproval, the better. The numbers are HJ Res 15 and HJ Res 16. And call Langevin, call Rep Cicilline, urge that they co-sponsor those two resolutions, and make sure that we get a lot of support and show Biden that Rhode Island is done with the war in Yemen. So I think that's really important. The other piece I wanted to mention is the humanitarian aspect. Now, I really think because Biden is pretty good on some of this now. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of you have to kind of bite your tongue because a lot of these same folks in the administration will have been the early architects of the war in 2015, but because of the work that grassroots activists have done, led by Yemeni Americans all over the country, we have the Democratic Party basically where we want to. And they didn't come to that, because they had an epiphany. They came to it because we forced votes and we forced them to do it from the grassroots. So I think that's really powerful. And because because they're saying the right things right now, what we have to do is we have to keep pushing Congress to push the administration. So, doing things like the war powers, like the joint resolutions of disapproval. Another thing we need to do is to, unfortunately, there was a disastrous designation of the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization. And it's really scary because what that means is we could see a cutting off of, no humanitarian would want to do any trade with the Houthis. And they're governing 80% of the population. This isn't just like an Al-Qaeda affiliate. This is a huge part of the country. And, regardless of how you feel about Houthis and the Houthi leadership, it's going to hurt millions of innocent Yemenis. And we have to reverse that on day one. And it's also going to make it really problematic and difficult to have robust peace talks, because if UN Special Envoy to Yemen, Martin Griffiths, wants to talk to the Houthi leadership, he could be held criminally liable for aiding and abetting a terrorist organization. So we have to reverse that. Rep Meeks has issued a statement, a letter signed by a bunch of members, and I think it would be great if Senator Reid also did that. That would be a really important ask, and urging Biden to reverse on day one. So, those are some of the things that we're looking at. There's a lot we could go kind of deeper into the weeds, but those are really the top line issues that I'm following right now. And on top of just urging an end to the blockade, because I don't see this conflict going anywhere. But that said, because of a lot of great activism that's been happening around the country, I think we're in a really good place on Yemen. I think it would be a great early win for the peace movement at large if we, work to end support for the Yemen war and then kind of reassess where we go with other war powers fights. With that, I think I could talk about Iran, because I think that's another important thing. And then maybe we can open it up to some questions. Sorry if I'm kind of rambling on here, but I think a lot of these points are super important, especially because your senator is going to become the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, possibly the most important senator on a lot of these issues that we're working on with regards to Yemen, with regards to Iran. So, you're in a position to make a huge impact. So, the Iran nuclear deal, obviously, was a major diplomatic achievement to curb Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. It's called the JCPOA, or the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. It took a lot of, incredible diplomacy. It took a long time. It wasn't guaranteed, but it came into being. Unfortunately, the Trump administration put in place a maximum pressure campaign and withdrew the U.S. from the deal. And that's been really a disaster on a number of fronts. I mean, if you care about reining in Iran's nuclear program, well, it didn't work for that. Iran has developed nuclear material, not enough to make a bomb, but they're up to 20% low enriched uranium. And so that's problematic. There's been other, violations of the deal. All are reversible, though, and I think that's a really important point to make to members, is that they haven't crossed any red lines where they couldn't go back. On the U.S. side, we need to, on top of just restoring our end of the bargain, we really need to do some good faith measures. I think working to get humanitarian aid to Iran, making sure that they have a license that can support, humanitarian trade related to COVID-19, testing kits, PPE, sanitizer, respirators, and make sure that they have access to the vaccine. Another thing that we're calling for is Iran has requested an emergency $5 billion IMF loan, and I think that's another critical step. But more importantly, I shouldn't say more importantly, but really what we're asking the administration to do is to support a compliance for compliance return to the JCPOA. Well, what does that mean? Um, there are some senators that really want to use the maximum pressure leverage on both sides. Democrats and Republicans are guilty of this. They want to use the maximum pressure campaign on Iran to get a better deal that addresses some of these other issues that Iran and the U.S. are still have outstanding. So on top of nuclear, developing nuclear material, one of the things that they're looking to do is rein in support for proxies in the region like Hezbollah or like the Houthis. Another thing they want to do is rein in their ability to get ballistic missiles. So these are concerns that lovers of peace probably should want to work on, but really it's about sequencing, and that's really the message we're trying to drive home on Capitol Hill, is that we cannot try to just use this maximum pressure leverage to get a better deal, because it's not going to work. There's a myriad of challenges with regards to Iran. But the most urgent threat is the proliferation of nuclear material, and restoring the JCPOA provides the soundest platform for further diplomacy to address the full range of issues but of disagreement. And last but not least, I want to flag is that there's an urgency issue going on. We don't have all the time in the world here. Iran's about to have a new election to replace Rouhani. His term has expired. He's been considered a moderate, friendly to diplomacy, friendly to the Iran nuclear deal, and that's he won't be in power. And because of the maximum pressure campaign, it's expected that a harder line leader is going to win, and that election is going to take place in June of this year, giving Biden only a short window here. So everything we can do right now to get members to speak out in favor of diplomacy with Iran or for a clean return to the Iran nuclear deal or compliance for compliance is really important. There have been a lot of efforts already. I think grassroots coalition groups, sending letters to Reed would be great right now. Personal, lobby visits with that office would be great. Getting Langevin to be better, working on him, I think that would be amazing. The effort that I thought deserves a little bit of credit and attention is in the House in December, right on Christmas Eve, 150 congressional Democrats on the House side signed a letter to Biden calling for a clean return to the JCPOA. And so we just need to keep that drumbeat going because, all these things are connected. Having Iran, restoring diplomacy with Iran is going to be really critical for a lot of these other issues that we're dealing with. It can be a real stabilizing force. The last thing I'll leave you all with before, I open it up to some questions, and I'm looking forward to, hopefully folks turn on their videos. I'd love to, your still pictures look great, but hey, like to put a name to the face here. But I will say that I think in 2021, we have a real moment to advance a lot of priorities from the peace movement, in particular, on Yemen and Iran, but a whole host of other issues as well, repealing AUMFs that are long outdated, cutting out OCO, the overseas contingency operations, like reducing the Pentagon budget, so there's a lot of opportunities, and I think, now's our time to really come together and double down. Just because Biden, just because Biden's in there, doesn't mean that we should relax. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here. You all know that this isn't the time to relax. It's actually the time to double down on our shared values. And when we look at our role in the Middle East, that's something that I want us to really think about and challenge. The status quo right now. Folks really see it's this white supremacy mindset, and of we need to dominate the Middle East. We need to be the hegemon in the Middle East, and that's the conversation that I'm hearing. A lot on the Hill, a lot more than I'd like to admit. And we have to really ask the question: is that serving the U.S. national security to be a military hegemon in the Middle East? It is. I would say no, it's not in our national security interest, and we need to really just make that point really clear to our legislators that it's not in our national security interest. We can engage, but the regime change wars, the selling weapons to authoritarians and dictators around the Middle East, it's just not working anymore. It's not sustainable, and it's time to change course here. So with that, I'll open it up.
Yeah, so I had a quick question that I wanted to ask for clarification purposes. You said it was which resolution that we should call our congressmen to support? What was the
Yeah,
number?
yeah. So HJ Res 15 and HJ Res 16. Rep Meeks, he's got two joint resolutions of disapproval for the Saudi weapons.
Fantastic. Okay, and then we have a question from Ross Rutherford, if you want me to read it off, or did you want to go?
Yeah, you can go ahead and read it off.
Okay. Hi, I'm a remote student in Washington District 9, Washington State District 9, the district where Adam Smith, chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, holds office. Is there anything I can do to pressure him prior to no longer being his constituent in 4 months? I've asked him about Yemen before in a town hall with the Sarah Smith Progressive primary campaign. I think that was the question, just how to pressure Adam Smith.
I think that's good. What I would say is, urge that he be a co-sponsor on these joint resolutions of disapproval. I haven't checked; he may already be, but if not, definitely make sure of that, and urge that he co-sponsor the Yemen War Powers resolution with Rep. Khanna. I think that would be two really great asks for him. Because of people like yourself and that great primary challenge, he's gotten pretty good on it. He really really blames Iran for a lot of what we're seeing in Yemen, unfortunately, and I think it's a little overblown. So he's a member that while he's done a lot of the right things, we do have to make kind of pivot folks back to, well, what's the U.S. role in the carnage? We can point fingers at other people, and people really want to. People in Washington love to point fingers at every other country that's doing something wrong, but we really have to look at what we're doing.
Tom Stone, if you wanted to go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Hassan. Thank you very much for coming to talk with us. So I wanted to ask about what you feel we can do as activists this year to sort of address the more underlying causes of U.S. militarism, and especially with regards to military funding and defense contractors. I found this sort of very hard to be optimistic about. It seems you're pretty optimistic about like specific actionable items with regards to certain wars right now. And I think that's incredibly important. We do have to address these symptoms, and calling them symptoms almost seems insulting, reductive. So I'm going to take that back. But I mean, especially in Rhode Island, I mean, we have Electric Boat. They build nuclear submarines miles down the bay. There's Raytheon building missiles in Rhode Island, and one of the big, as I'm sure and a lot of other folks know, senators are super big on the war funding. So.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a big question you ask, and I'm gonna try to give you an answer that can match the gravity of the question you're asking. Now, I think there's kind of a couple ways to approach it on the defense spending. I think we have a real opportunity because of COVID, because there's budget shortfalls all over the place, is to cut OCO, which is the Overseas Contingency Operations. It's essentially acting like the Pentagon slush fund. This is not in the base budget. It's about $80 billion a year. They use it to do foreign military interventions, and it's just it's a slush fund. It's not in the budget. So if we can cut that out and then cap the budget for the next few years, that actually would result in like an $80 billion cut to the Pentagon. If there's a better option for like a way to get something through Congress, I don't know. Because I really think that for the peace movement, this is probably the most realistic, option. You might see progressive Democrats in the House call for the 10% cut again. I can see that, but to me, this seems a little bit more strategic because who wants to support a slush fund? That's I think that's really important. Now, on the other issues you bring up with regards to weapons sales more broadly, there's a lot that I think we can think about. Obviously, the war in Yemen. I really like to focus on this because it's actionable. It's something that we can do within the first 30 to 100 days in the administration, and then use that momentum to do the next thing. But let's talk through some of how we can do this. I think making an example of Saudi Arabia, one of these big weapons, purchasers, and really going after companies and the U.S. for selling weapons to Saudi Arabia is just a really strategic thing to do because they're already on our side, So that's really important. I think there are some really great divestment campaigns. If you look at the way CEOs get paid of these weapons contractors, the base salary is pretty little, but the stock value is a big part of how they make money. So if you do these, robust divestment campaigns, making sure that the, URI and that Brown and all these other colleges in Rhode Island have divested from weapons manufacturers, making sure that city councils have divested from the weapons industry, taking it kind of piecemeal. Eventually, you get enough cities, get enough colleges, we're rolling here. So I would, spend energy in that. And obviously, that's a bit outside. I'll just mention one more thing that we can do on the inside in Congress. There's a lot of fixes. And I think when we make things harder or make the oversight process more rigorous, Trump just completely tore up so many norms, and really has made a bad situation worse with regards to accountability for weapons sales. So what we can do right now, the way it works is if through the Arms Export Control Act, if you want to buy, if you want to sell weapons to another country, it triggers a review process, and the State Department notifies the Congress. And you need a resolution of disapproval to be able to block the weapon sales. And obviously that means Trump or President elect Biden, soon to be President Biden, could to be able to block him from doing that, you need 67 votes in the Senate. So you can flip the script and make, and some people are talking about this reform and create a system where you need resolutions of approval instead of disapproval. So Congress will only need a simple majority. I think that's another, structural reform we can look at. Okay, good.
The next question that we have is from Myra Goodman.
Hi, it's
Cool.
Mira. So I was wondering what you think about how the UAE will react if we choose to, hold them accountable, and I guess, yeah, that's my whole question.
Well, they're not going to be happy. If we cut off billions in weapon sales, I think they'll be upset. But what I do think they will do is adjust their behavior in Yemen. I think we've seen that when you try to hold regimes like that accountable, is that they start to change behavior. Let's look at what they've already done and to extrapolate further of what they might do if we cut off these weapons. So we forced a vote in 2018 on Yemen war powers. In fact, we forced two votes. And we passed SJ-Res 7, SJ-Res 54 in the Senate, and then we passed another Yemen war powers, the one that got vetoed in 2019. And after that, we saw the UAE say, we gotta back off. They actually started pulling out some of their military from Yemen. Now, Trump vetoed the bill, so ultimately the support continued, but even the threat of Congress acting in a bipartisan way got them to change their behavior. It also got, the sides to agree to a ceasefire in Hodeidah, and that's Yemen's largest port. We forced all these votes. We got the sides starting to talk to each other, and at the beginning of 2020, I thought I'd be out of a job. I really thought we were heading for peace in Yemen, but when the negotiators pulled out the provisions to block, our ability to end support for the war, the violence just increased. So to me, that tells me that the more we try to hold them accountable, the more progress we're going to make with the peace process.
Our next question is from Enrique Sanchez.
Hey, thank you for being here with us today, Hassan. I have a question about the current administration, or the new elected administration. I'm sure you've paid attention to how, the picks for Biden's cabinet, people on his, the people on his administration, are folks that come from all different kinds of backgrounds, right? We had a discussion last meeting for Brown Watch, the Rainbow Coalition of cabinet members, because you have folks with who are black, who are brown, who are women, LGBTQ plus, all types of backgrounds and nationalities, ethnicities, but for some reason, war and imperialism and economic sanctions support brings people together still, right, to be more aggressive towards countries who are considered adversaries around the world to the US. So my overall question is this: under this new administration, are we going to see a new conflict build up, ramped up under a Biden administration, under this Rainbow Coalition of cabinet members, or do we see more, we see a less aggressive administration towards, hostilities with countries who are adversaries?
Well, if I have anything to say about it, we're going to see world peace. But I think what you're asking is, will it be more hawkish or less hawkish compared to Trump, or is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I would also go on to say that, I would also add that Trump, although we think about these things about Trump, right? All this, aggressiveness, pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, ramping up the sanctions on countries, adversaries around the world. But at the end of the day, under a Trump administration, there was no new conflict created, and no war, military intervention was created. So I'm curious to know, what your thoughts are on this new administration compared to Trump administration.
Yeah, I guess I would just push back a little bit on the idea that no new conflicts were created. I look at sanctions as war. If you're choking somebody off from their ability to get food and medicine, clean water and fuel to, power their hospitals, it's killing tons of people. Supporting the Saudi-led coalition and, just turning a blind eye as they, push 16 million people to the brink of famine, infect, millions of people with cholera, kids are dying. We haven't really seen any, going to the heart, trying to actually resolve conflicts. But your point is taken. There wasn't a Libya type situation. We didn't go in and start a coup and take out, Gaddafi and, create a civil war. So the point is taken. Now, I do see this cabinet, I don't see it with rose-colored glasses. I think the real leverage that we have here in the peace movement is Congress. I think as much as we can push Congress, the key members and the key committees, and I would say it's really up to us how they respond. And if we put enough pressure on folks like Senator Reid to do the right thing, then that's going to have a lot of power. It's going to have a lot of influence over the Biden administration, who needs these, the slim majority needs the Democrats to kind of stay with them. That actually gives a lot of power to the progressive caucus, because they need that caucus to be able to pass things through. So again, they need every single senator, including Bernie Sanders, to be able to get a lot of these agenda items through. So, I'm not hopeful that they're going to do the right thing all the time without our pressure, but we've shown that pressure on these key spots will make a difference. I think these policy resets I'm talking about, with ending the war in Yemen, restoring diplomacy with Iran, lowering the Pentagon budget if we can make that happen, restoring humanitarian aid to the Palestinians, repealing the AUMFs, the 2002 Iraq AUMF, which we used to kill Soleimani. That's got to go. We need to repeal that, not replace it. The 2001 AUMF is going to be more of a challenge, but that's another thing that we have to work on. And I think we're in a way better position now with Biden, who actually, will actually listen. I started lobbying 5 years ago, and I've just been lobbying people in the Trump era. I'm looking forward to this challenge where people that actually want to pick up your calls. Like, I think we're going to have a lot more influence on the administration, especially if we mobilize Senate Democrats and House Democrats.
Okay, so we have another question from Alberto. Removing U.S. support in the Saudi-led coalition and removal of the Houthis as a terrorist group does not really bring peace for Yemen. What other plans does the Biden administration have to reverse the damage done in Yemen? Which I think is a great question.
It is. Nothing's going to reverse the damage done. What's happened to Yemen is it's just deeply tragic, traumatic. It's terrible what we've seen. Now, and you're right, just cutting support won't end the war automatically, but it will help a lot, in my opinion. And it's kind of a situation where we're supporting some of the bad actions. When we pull that support, my belief is that the Saudi coalition will cease to function as it does now. I think, by cutting off the flow of spare parts transfers, the intel sharing, the logistical support, and the weapons, we could literally ground the entire Saudi fleet within 24 hours. Every time a F-15 lands on a runway, these tires need to be replaced, and you can't just go to Walmart to get these things. You can go to weapons contractors in the U.S. to purchase the parts that you need. And so I'm not overstating it on how dependent Saudi Arabia is on our involvement. And if that ends, they've got billions of dollars worth of hardware that can't really just start using Russian missiles or Chinese technology. It's really kind of a Macintosh Dell situation where it's the Macintosh hardware is only going to work on the Macintosh, and the Dell stuff is not going to be able to be used in a very easy way. So we have a lot of leverage there to stop the airstrikes and to get Saudi to do more. But you're right, we need to do a lot more. We need to restore and expand humanitarian aid to all parts of the country. And in March of last year, we suspended aid to the Houthis, the 80% of the population, in Houthi-governed territory, which is horrible. And that came at the same time of rolling back UN programming, WHO, World Food Programming, and Yemen was short almost $2 billion last year for what it needed. So that's absolutely critical to kind of restore that humanitarian aid. I have a meeting actually with the House Foreign Affairs Committee on Friday, and they want to talk Yemen. And one thing I'm going to ask is that we get at least back to 2019 levels of funding, which from the U.S. side, which is about 746 million. I'm going to ask for at least that, so we can support Yemen through this COVID-19 pandemic and all the existing tragedies that are going on. So that's really important. I'm also going to be pushing for a new UN Security Council resolution. The first one in 2015 just basically said nobody should sell weapons to the Houthis. Cut them off, and didn't really say anything about Saudi. I think we need to address all parties to the conflict. No more selling weapons to anybody in Yemen. And making that a Security Council resolution calling on an end to the blockade, the Saudi-led coalition blockade on Yemen, which is cutting off the air, land, and sea ports of entry. So I think a new push for that, really gonna expanding the complicity and what we do about it, and pushing for a nationwide ceasefire and working diplomatically. But it's going to require that we give up that military support to the coalition for any of this to be possible.
Thank you. Les, did you want to ask your question?
Thank you, Hassan, for an incredibly informative evening. Greatly appreciated. I 100% agree with you that flattening these conflicts into proxy wars is a form of erasure for social movements that are really fighting for particular struggles on the ground. Whether Yemen has had a long history of this and been flattened by Saudi, intervention and Egyptian intervention, trying to stop these social movements spilling over to their own societies. That said, and you've addressed many of those things on the ground, but that said, I think that one country or three countries that we haven't mentioned that I would be interested to hear your opinion on as players in the region, and especially affecting Yemen and Iran, is we've seen Israel has been ascendant during the Trump administration. And we've seen recently the normalization with other Arab countries. So the question is similar to Mira's. What is Israel going to do if suddenly it doesn't quite get its way? Secondly, China. I think that the China-Iran alliance, I think, is not well understood or known, but that China has been a significant investor in Iran, and we know that the Cold War pressure is building. What do you see China's part of the dynamic with the Iran story being? So Israel and China, I guess, are my two questions. How Biden will negotiate those two powers that have an important say in the region.
Those are really good questions. Obviously, the situation with Israel, is a potential obstacle, a real obstacle for restoring diplomacy with Iran. And I see that manifesting itself in the statements I heard today at some of these nomination hearings. The Republicans came out pretty strong against the Iran nuclear deal, and even key senators like Menendez, are saying that, they're concerned about getting back into the Iran nuclear deal, and they want to use that maximum pressure leverage. And I see a through line with, what Israel's desires are to what some of these senators are saying. I think there's a real influence. Now, my pushback for folks is, at the end of the day, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, they all benefit from the U.S. security blanket, and they've been using Iran as the boogeyman for way too long. And it's really time for us to change our entire approach to the region, and let kind of take our foot off the gas, back up, let these Gulf states and Israel, Saudi, UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, let people sort out some of their own differences. And I think that's really important. They're going to do it kicking and screaming. I think my, ways to counter that, I would target Menendez, I would target Coons, and I would target Cardin. New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, I think those are three flashpoints for, potentials to impact these nodes of how that that's looking. That said, you know, a lot of Democrats do want to return to the JCPOA, the compliance for compliance, and that was, made apparent in that letter. So we're seeing that, Trump took us so far with maximum pressure. There's definitely kind of a whiplash, and a lot of Democrats are saying, you know what, we want a complete rejection of that policy. So Trump didn't do himself any favors by being so extreme. And I do feel like there's momentum for peace, especially now that we don't have Republicans in control of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which they could control the hearing schedule and control, they could put up votes every other week on new sanctions on Iran and really make it complicated for Biden. But because we've got the Senate here, I think we're going to be able to push back on a lot of this. Really try to make the case that it's not in the U.S. national security interest. When I'm talking to lawmakers, I'm really trying to make that case. It's this new paradigm. We need a new paradigm for the U.S. role in the Middle East, with the U.S. not as a regional hegemon, enforcing our will militarily. With regards to Iran and China, yeah, there's no doubt. There's a lot of tensions. People are wanting a new Cold War with China. They want to ramp up the military spending, which I think is ridiculous. My view is that China hasn't started a war in 40 years. How many wars or coups has the U.S. started? So I think it's really an important moment. And luckily, I haven't heard a ton about Iran, a ton about China as we're having these conversations with Iran, even though that's very prevalent. And something that people don't mention either is that the UAE is, purchasing oil from Iran, or that Qatar has relationships with Iran too. So it's really complex. I think, as much as we can is kind of get Saudi, the UAE, and Israel to, as much as we can kind of hold them at bay and not run after Iran as being the boogeyman, because they have a vested interest in getting the U.S. To be perpetually engaged militarily so they can benefit from the U.S. security umbrella.
Thank you. I want to bring it back a little bit locally and ask you to talk. You mentioned it a little bit, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what it means to have Senator Reid, the senator of Rhode Island, be the head of the Senate Armed Services Committee.
It's incredibly important. So every year there's a National Defense Authorization Act that the Congress votes on. And this is the Pentagon Bill, the policy bill that sets the terms of, all sorts of things, from weapon sales to, war powers to how we're going to, operate on the ground in all parts of the world militarily. And so he's basically the chief negotiator of this massive bill. And it usually comes down to, the House Armed Services Committee, Senate Armed Services Committee, and the chairs and ranking members of the committee, which would be Senator Reid, Representative Smith, Senator Inhofe would be the ranking member on the Senate Armed Services Committee. He'd be the Republican. And Thornberry just retired, so I don't know who's going to fill that spot on the Republican side in the House. But he has an immense amount of negotiating power, and his negotiating power just increased. We could put potentially, if nothing happens on some of these things that we're talking about early on, we have the option to really pressuring Senator Reid to get provisions through the NDAA to end the war in Yemen, stop weapons to Saudi and the UAE. We have the option to prohibit U.S. funding to support annexation of the West Bank. We can do so much with this bill, and I think it can't be oversold how much power that the senator has.
Do you have a quick minute for me to ask a follow-up question?
Sure, yeah. I
So,
can see it a little bit.
Okay. We still have a lot of questions rolling in, so just let me know when.
Okay.
Yeah. So you didn't mention the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations as playing a role, and that was interesting to me because recently, in a lobbying visit, that was brought up as, oh, that's not so much us that would be pushing forth this repealing the 2002 AUMF. It would be more the Foreign Relations Committee. So I was just curious, other people might be running into this issue as well. So can you give us kind of some feedback on what we can say to somebody in that event?
I omitted it just because Senator Reid's on SASC, or Senate Armed Services, but it's a very important committee. And so is the House Foreign Affairs Committee as well. It's like, the House version, the Senate version of these committees. Now, to get something like an AUMF repeal into the NDAA, what you need is a waiver from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to allow it to be in the bill. And so, yeah, it's super important, but you can say, yeah, we request that you get a waiver to try to, support this in the bill. So that's really, I think, the way that I would address that. And focusing on members on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is really important. Your neighbor to the west, I guess, Senator Murphy is right there. You've got Senator Markey right to, so you're surrounded by SFRC members, Senate Foreign Relations Committee members. So, if there's a way to work with Massachusetts Peace Action to kind of, get the sides talking, to get Senator Reid to work with Markey, maybe to get a waiver for some bills, or even Senator Murphy, who's been very good on Yemen, I will say.
Thank you. That's a great idea. Following up to that, Tom Stone has another question.
Okay.
I just had a really quick thing. How do you, sort of your group's view on how effective are you able to engage Republicans, if at all? I'm just sort of curious.
The only way we passed the Yemen War Powers resolution was because of Republicans. We got 7 Republicans. We got Murkowski, Collins, Daines, Moran, Senator Young, Senator Paul, and Senator Lee were the 7 Republicans that joined us. And while the Democrats really were concerned about the humanitarian crisis and Trump's overreach, the Republicans had kind of they cared about the humanitarian aspect too, but they were thinking war authority, congressional war authority. That was one of the main driving points, and that's a way we can bridge this left-right divide on questions of war powers. Is that Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, if you want to get super nerdy, is the part of our Constitution that allows Congress to declare war. And because the war was never authorized by Congress, that's an issue for Republicans that really care about the Constitution and this checks and balances system. So yeah, there's definitely ways to find common ground with this stuff. And there was bipartisan support for the Iran War Powers Resolution too, to prevent war and to prevent strikes on Iran, that was passed right after the assassination of Soleimani. And that actually got 8 Republicans, not 7. So there's a lot of support, especially the 2001, 2002 AUMF repeal. There's a lot of Republicans, excuse me, there's a lot of Republicans in the House that care about that, libertarian Republicans and others. So I think we just gotta, try to figure out what's the message that'll resonate with them. And that war powers issue is a really one to find a lot of common ground on.
Thank you so much. You gave us so many action points, and we really appreciate it. I
didn't overwhelm you all.
I think you did a really great job of breaking it down, and I just want to apologize to everybody whose questions we didn't get to, but I did my best to moderate them, and we are so thankful for your time. And please follow Hassan on the Twitter page that we sent. Please come to Brown War Watch meetings. Please look into the calendar, the brownwarwatch.com calendar of events, and to get the Zoom link for attending the FCNL chapter meetings every Friday at 4. We would really love to see you there. So thank you again, everyone, for your time. And thank you again, Hassan. We truly, truly appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you all so much for all the work you're doing and putting out such great reports, engaging with your members of Congress. In Rhode Island, you have a key role here to play, and you guys are a force to be reckoned with. And please don't hesitate to reach out. If you need anything else from me, I'm happy to be a resource.
Great. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you so much.